bollech-fonseca. Heather bollech-fonseca was born in upstate New York and currently lives in Sunrise, Florida. She has been studying Spiritism for 14 years, during which time she has been working to raise awareness about its existence and teachings through writing, speaking, and translating. She is the co-founder of the Leon Dennis Spiritist Group and the co-developer of ExploreSpiritism.com website. Heather has worked as a volunteer in local charitable organizations and is an active participant in the activities of Spiritist centers in Florida, attending meetings and contributing as a guest speaker. With a bachelor's degree in Spanish and environmental policy and planning, as well as a master's in business administration, Heather currently works in the field of project management. Heather's topic today will be Penal Code of the Life to Come. Heather?
Good afternoon. Penal Code of the Life to Come. At first, this might seem like a rather dreary or gloomy topic, but don't worry. In Spiritism, we talk about immutable natural laws that govern creation. But those who study their principles in theory and the examples of them in action find not motive for fear or cause for doubt, but instead compassion, reason, a source of comfort and hope. Spiritist teachings, in part, outline laws pertaining to the future of the immortal soul. And as we go along in this discussion, it's important to keep in mind that our knowledge of these laws was derived from the systematic observation and meticulously careful study of spirit communications, including countless examples furnished by spirits of all categories and through mediums scattered throughout the earth. These are communications from higher order spirits who have given us explanations, examples, and clarifications, as well as discarded spirits and varying conditions who've shared their own testimonies. So let's get started and break this topic down a bit. First of all, this life to come. What does that mean, life to come? Does it mean like 20, 30, 40 years from now? Or if our souls survive the death of the physical body, are we talking about life after death? Or is this about reincarnation, a future life in the material world? And the answer is yes, because it's all of them. Our souls maintain their individuality at all times, and the continuity of life is never interrupted. Second, penal code, by definition, refers to an established policy of penalties applied to a particular set of crimes or offenses. An offense, of course, is the violation of some rule or law. So spiritually speaking, what laws are we to be following? And what happens when we don't? In Spiritism, we talk about a set of moral laws that can be studied and are studied in greater detail, but that basically call upon us to work hard, to contribute in a positive way to society, to make efforts to progress morally and intellectually, and above all, to love. To love God, ourselves, and one another. And that's it. That is our Creator's intent. But we were given the free will to choose our own actions. And as our human spirits were created in a state of simplicity and unawareness, this free will increases over time in accordance with our own developments in knowledge, experience, and awareness of right and wrong, which we acquire over the course of one material life to the next, as well as in between each of those incarnations. So it sounds simple enough, right? But as we're here interacting in this crazy world around us, we are confronted with innumerable forms of internal and external influence. We encounter all kinds of experiences to which we must decide how we're going to react. and we're faced at times with personal limitations, but we're also blessed with certain gifts. And as a result of all of that, we are continuously making choices all day, every day, big and small, short term and long term. And these choices represent the ways in which we exercise the privilege and the responsibility of the free will that is granted to us. At times, we make good choices. Whenever our thoughts and behaviors are in agreement with God's laws, then in accordance with our knowledge, sacrifice, and the effort on our part, they help to add to our merit for future happiness and attenuate the impact of our bad moves, because we don't always make such wise decisions. And in those moments, we violate God's laws. Now, in Spiritism, we don't really refer to those actions as sins, so to speak, because they're mistakes. They're poor choices that do run the gamut from minor errors or small stumbles to great falls that can cause significant, even deplorable harm to ourselves and others. And these situations, in accordance with their severity, our degree of knowledge, and all surrounding circumstances of which only God and our spiritual benefactors are fully aware, result in moral debts and negative consequences for our spirit. So what happens? What does the Penal Code say? Does God judge and punish us? Or how do these negative consequences play out? Well, let's take a look at one testimonial communication found in Kardec's book, Heaven and Hell. In this dialogue, a discarnate spirit who had committed murder in his most recent incarnation was asked a series of questions, and in one of the answers to the incarnate questioners, he told them that he was asking God for forgiveness. And he said, "I'm being punished for my lack of faith in him, and for knowing that we must not shorten the lives of our brothers. I'm being punished by the remorse of having delayed my own progress, taking the false path, and not listening to the cry of my conscience telling me that it is not through murder that I would achieve my objective. But I let myself be dominated by pride and jealousy. I was wrong and have repented, because men must always make the efforts to control their inferior passions, and I did not." Now, if we back up to just one question before the one that spawned this answer that I just read, we see that the spirit was asked, "Are you being punished for the crime that you committed?" To which he answered, "Yes, I regret what I did, and this makes me suffer." Regret is the weight of a heavy conscience, burdened with unresolved debts. It is in our conscience that God's laws are written, giving it that inner voice that warns us against potential wrong and alerts us to the mistakes when we've made them. It is our conscience, not our Creator, that judges us. If you've ever done something significantly wrong without the immediate or foreseeable opportunity for redress, and you have felt that burning, thought-consuming desire to explain yourself, to apologize, to be forgiven and make things right, something that can feel like hell on earth, then you can see why for a discarnate spirit who's in the spirit realm feeling those sensations but with no concept of time and no visibility as to how he can bring his suffering to an end, the mental anguish of a heavy conscience can seem like eternal torment. And you can see why the allegory of the burning flames of hell, while not describing a true physical reality, is actually quite accurate in symbolic terms. And this is an example of how a spirit, upon leaving the earth, can suffer as a result of his actions. Now keep in mind that when we do leave the body or cross over, return to the spirit realm, we don't change from who we were just moments before. As immortal spirits with an ethereal body called the perispirit, we just disconnect from this heavy garment that was our material covering, or our gear, so to speak, during that incarnate life. But our personalities and beliefs, the objects of our attention, the thoughts and feelings that we cultivated during that incarnate lifetime stay with us. And then by the law of attraction and the workings of our conscience, they draw us to the places and conditions in the spirit realm with which they have an affinity. So for this reason, there are innumerable forms of suffering or conditions of suffering in the spirit realm for less evolved, discarnate souls whose choices and actions reflected imperfections that dominated their behaviors or thoughts in one way or another. To cite a few other examples, such spirits may face immersion in total darkness, ignorance of the fate that awaits them, maybe a belief that they're still alive in the material world, or various pains and necessities that they themselves caused others to endure. The proud may be tormented to see exalted those whom they'd once humiliated, while a criminal may have perpetual visions of her crime and its victims. Hypocrites may feel shamed to have their most secret thoughts exposed, while misers hate to witness their fortune being wasted with no way to save it. And the selfish may feel deserted, finding no one to comfort them or help them with their needs. Sounds pretty heavy, and it is. But God is indeed infinitely merciful, and I'm going to tell you why. For one thing, those who return to the spirit realm with a lighter conscience find a relative degree of happiness, with more pleasant surroundings, the company of loved ones, an awareness of more advanced spirits and worlds that inspire them to continue progressing, opportunities to work, study, and grow, and the satisfaction of having made good use of their precious time here in the material world. Now, of course, we're not perfect. We've all made mistakes. So it is the overall inclination of our efforts and actions, our thoughts and behaviors, as well as our spiritual mental state at the moment of disincarnating, that determines what we experience when we encounter life after death. Don't think, however, that those unhappy spirits are forgotten. They're never abandoned or left to suffer eternally. What kind of just, merciful, and loving God, who deems forgiveness to be a virtue, would condemn his own children to eternal damnation with just one chance, just one life in all of eternity to get it right? Or consider the most virtuous being you can imagine with all the merit in the world for a happy life after death. Could that individual truly be happy knowing that others, from strangers to perhaps some particular loved ones, would not be so fortunate and would instead suffer till the end of time or eternity for having made some unfortunate choices or buckled under the struggles of life? Fortunately, that's not the way it is. God always leaves the door open for the guilty to return to the pathway of the good. Because you see, as Allan Kardec said, God's mercy is infinite, but not blind. And so God's grace does not manifest in the form of a blanket pardon or annulment of our wrongs, meaning with no consequences, but instead in the infinite opportunities to repair and to redeem. So once these unhappy spirits tire of their suffering, however long that takes, and a spark of repentance awakens within them, they become receptive to the help of good spirits who take them to places of rehabilitation in the spirit realm where they renew their energies, develop the resolve to repay their debts, and await the precious opportunity to return to the material world. This opportunity forms a part of the process of reincarnation. If we take a look at this scale that I've had up here, and imagine that on one side of the scale, we place all of our accumulating merits and moral qualities, and on the other, our debts. Every wrongdoing and every meritorious act, each properly weighted, as I had alluded to, goes on this scale. And the idea is that over the evolutionary course of many, many incarnations in worlds that correspond to our stage of evolutionary development, we will one day reach the point where we no longer have anything weighting down on the debt side and the merits and moral quality side is completely filled. Something that represents the complete purification and therefore the complete happiness of the spirit. With that said, as I mentioned, our noble actions, those in agreement with God's laws, help us to earn these merits and develop these qualities. But those efforts are also needed to pay off the debts that we put on this scale. Now consider that our debts are acquired through the wrong that we do, the wrong that we cause others to do, and even the good that we fail to do according to our stage of moral development. Then there are three conditions that we meet in the process of erasing the remnants of any wrong and its consequence. The first is repentance, which is an acknowledgement of the wrong and a sincere desire to correct it, which can happen at any time or place, but the sooner it happens, the sooner our corrective process can begin. The second is expiation, or atonement. And Kardec wrote that until the last vestiges of a wrong have disappeared, expiation consists in the physical and mental sufferings that are its consequence, whether in the current lifetime, the spirit life after death, or a later corporeal existence. So people say to me, oh, so this is like karma, right? And it depends on how you view or understand the concept of karma. Because this isn't merely some bad energy that we throw out there in the universe coming back to bite us. The process is way more orderly and 100% personal. And you can study more about that through a deeper study of Spiritism and the law of cause and effect. But whatever we don't correct in the current life, we carry with us to the spirit realm and quite often to a new incarnation. It's kind of like those rollover minutes we used to have on our cell phone plans. But spiritually speaking, we have rollover debts that we carry with us until their balance is paid. But this payment should not be considered a type of divine vengeance. It affords opportunities that help us to heal by liberating our conscience and that educate us, showing us a better way. To help us understand that, Kardec gave us an analogy, saying that spirits who are being punished are not like galley slaves sentenced to years of hard labor, but like patients in a hospital, suffering from an illness due to their own fault, who must now endure the necessary means of cure, but with the hope of finally being healed. So think for a moment now about all the painful struggles and difficulties that one can experience while living here on this planet. We know that oftentimes we bring problems upon ourselves. But for those puzzling and stressful, frustrating situations that seem to have no other explanation, the answer can be found in the mechanics of reincarnation. And unless we're talking about one of those relatively rare cases where a spirit has chosen those conditions simply to propel his progress more quickly, solidify the learning of a lesson, or accomplish some kind of mission, we are in fact talking about suffering as a form of atonement. For this reason, we can say with just cause that hardships and adversity make us stronger. They make us stronger spiritually, because through them we learn to give value to what we failed to appreciate in the past. But this learning can only take place when we face our difficulties with courage and resignation. So we often hear or read statements to the fact that life is mostly not about the things that happen to us, but how we react to them. And yet, without the proper context to understand this kind of statement that's intended to be motivational, it can be a pretty hard pill to swallow, especially for someone in dire circumstances or a great deal of pain who may feel that it's insensitive or belittles their problems. Maybe that they're alone, that they're unequipped or unprepared or undeserving of whatever it is they're going through. And herein lies the value of the knowledge that we acquire in Spiritism, because it gives us the context to understand that the things that happen do have meaning, but that our reaction to them is also an important part of that. Spiritist knowledge doesn't take away our immediate struggles, but it does help us to have the courage to change what can be changed and the serenity to accept what cannot. It shows us how our suffering has a purpose and an end that's in our own hands. It teaches us how to tap into the help from the spirit realm. It gives us a new perspective on our relationships. And those communications from higher order spirits are full of such comforting words of encouragement and wisdom. Furthermore, we have the testimonies like the ones in heaven and hell, or the illustrative eyewitness cases shared by André Louise, or the moving accounts in the novels from Emmanuel, and so many others. Now, when we read those books, we see the personal stories of those spirits, and we learn about their backgrounds, the history of events that led up to their willingness to return to the material world and undergo the expiations needed for their suffering. We can then take that perspective and translate it back to our own lives so that we better grasp, now in a practical way, why things happen the way they do, why we must make the effort to endure, and why there's reason to have hope for a better tomorrow. Following repentance and expiation, the third condition necessary for fully breaking free from the consequences of a wrong is reparation, which consists in righting a wrong that has been done, proving the sincerity of our repentance and making up for the hurt or damage that we caused. When this doesn't happen until a later incarnation, we often come into contact with the same spirit or spirits that we had once offended, as part of the circumstances for our opportunity for making amends. This can also take the form of doing something we'd failed to do, fulfilling duties we'd neglected, or accomplishing a mission at which we had failed. It's exercising the noble qualities in place of our former negative traits or behaviors. Each of these conditions, repentance, expiation, and reparation, are studied in detail in Spiritism. But there are a couple of main themes that we can take away from all of this. And the first is that God's laws are not vindictive, but gracious and fully just. They establish our accountability, ours and everybody else's, reason why it's better to forgive and leave things in God's hands. But they establish our accountability and they ensure our eventual state of complete happiness according to the workings of the law of progress. The other takeaway is that life is like an ongoing harvest where the bottom line of all of this can be summed up in that moral maxim, to each according to his deeds. And in this ongoing harvest called life, we are constantly reaping today what we sowed in the past while we are planting the seeds for what we experience tomorrow. And though the use of our free will determines the pace at which we individually travel, each and every one of us will one day live a life that is sublime and magnificent beyond words. But as I mentioned, getting there is not always easy in the here and now. We are not mere robots. able to program ourselves with this information and change overnight. We are immortal and evolving human spirits. In this life, we are in relationships with parents, children, siblings, and other relatives, friends, co-workers, and other acquaintances, some of whom share in our spiritual history, but none of whom see or think in the same way that we do, to say the least. We also experience powerful feelings. We deal with real struggles. We face strong temptations and all kinds of influences. And we cry not just tears of joy, but also tears of sorrow and pain. So how do we make sense of it all? Where do we find the motivation to take the right path? The context to understand life here on earth and envision what lies beyond. The courage to choose patience, tolerance, forgiveness, and humbleness. And the willingness to persevere when life is rough. One source is right here. Today in particular, we've been focused on this book, which indeed teaches us about love, enlightening us on what it means to love and to be loved, showing us the pathway to redeeming ourselves from the debts of our past and clearing the pathway to happiness and peace. In other words, the pathway to self-healing. Discover for yourself the richness of the guidance, clarification, and encouragement found in its readings, and you will feel the embrace from the spirit realm delivered in each of its chapters. In Spiritist books like this one and so many others, we find illustrations of God's wisdom and mercy so that we better grasp in a practical way what Jesus meant by his references to our loving Father. Today's discussion of the Penal Code is just one example. But I hope that, in particular for those of you who are new to Spiritism, it has helped you to see life, past, present, and future, in a new way that encompasses compassion, reason, renewal, and hope. Thank you very much, and God bless.